teenagers are charged with murder after a carjacking of a DC UberEats driver. We look at the prosecution and defense arguments that are expected in the Derek Chauvin trial upcoming this week, and Chris Wallace rips into Jen Psaki over the administration's transparency when it comes to the border crisis. These stories and more on your March 29th Nuts News Update. Please like and subscribe if you're looking for daily news content, and let's dive on in. Starting us off from the Hill, we have two charged with murder after carjacking of DC UberEats driver. In the article, police in Washington, D.C. say two teenage girls have been arrested on charges of felony murder and armed carjacking for their alleged role in the death of UberEats driver Mohammad Anwar. According to CNN, the Metropolitan Police Department said the two girls ages 13 and 15 used a taser on Anwar, 66, during a recent carjacking attempt on Tuesday. The attack, police said, prompted an accident that resulted in his death. Anwar, who lived in Springfield, Virginia, was described by his family in the GoFundMe as a hardworking Pakistani immigrant who came to the United States to create a better life for him and his family. Details are still being investigated. However, we know that Anwar was working on an UberEats delivery when two assailants attempted to carjack him in Navy Yard, they said, of his death. There's a couple things that I think are noteworthy in here. First, earlier this year there were a lot of issues going on when it came to tasers and how deadly they are, where specifically when it involved police interactions. There was I believe it was in Georgia, where there was a shooting when a criminal stole a police officer's taser, and everyone said that the taser was non-lethal. This type of incident shows the potential lethality of a taser and how it can be used as a weapon. Additionally, if you end up searching the video for this event, I would recommend it if you're willing to see graphic detail. You do see the murder of this individual, but after the event, one of the two girls ends up walking away, walks right by the man who's laying on the ground bleeding out, and asks where her phone is. This just shows how out of touch today's children are, and to be honest, people my age are with the world around them. We see no respect for life. We see no respect for our fellow neighbor, and this just shows the breakdown of humanity currently going on. Additionally, Mayor Muriel Bowser ended up sending out this social media campaign for Protect Your Auto. Auto theft is a crime of opportunity. Follow these steps to reduce your risk of the vehicle becoming a target. Remember the motto, Protect Your Auto. It's not yet been revealed whether this was in a response to the actions. However, it is, really scary to see that this was timed literally the day of or day after the events that happened with Anwar. And I don't know if it's just bad timing, if this was already expected to come out, but seeing that it came out on a Sunday, I don't see there being many political campaigns that happen on, a Sunday afternoon. So the same rhetoric almost seems like victim blaming. It's the same logic of, asking a girl like what clothes she was wearing when she was raped or whatever. We should not be saying that individuals need to, really protect their auto. Obviously you want to do, whatever you can to, protect your own stuff or whatever. But the biggest thing is we need to make it so we hold individuals that are criminals responsible for, whatever they do. Regardless of whether this was just bad timing, it would be nice to see Muriel Bowser puts out some kind of notice saying that this wasn't, in response. As far as I know, that has not happened yet. Next, NBC News looks at the arguments that are expected to happen during the Derek Chauvin trial. Derek Chauvin was the police officer that's currently being charged with killing George Floyd. And I want to just do a quick looking into what they're expecting the arguments to be for both the prosecution and the defense. And NBC News reports the following for the prosecution. The prosecution will argue Chauvin's restraint of Floyd for nearly 9 minutes was a substantial cause of his loss of consciousness and ultimately death in police custody. In an amended complaint, prosecutors with the Office of Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison state the medical examiner listed Floyd's cause of death as cardiopulmonary arrest, complicating law enforcement subdual, restraint, and neck compression, and that the manner of death was ruled a homicide. The complaint adds the autopsy stated Floyd had heart disease and presence of fentanyl in his system, and that the medical examiner opined the effect of the defendant's restraining of Floyd plus his underlying conditions and the presence of drugs contributed to his death. The complaint says while Floyd was restrained for nearly 9 minutes, he repeatedly stated he could not breathe, and his physical condition continued to deteriorate such the force was no longer necessary to control him. Essentially, it's just a continuation of this argument that essentially the knee on the back of the neck was what caused the death. Looking did not mean to hit that. Looking at the defense's argument in this trial, 1 second. The defense states that the medical examiner found no bruising of Mr. Floyd's neck or on any neck muscles or any injury to neck structures. If Mr. Chauvin had intended to inflict harm to Mr. Floyd's back and neck with the knee, surely there would be evidence of bruising, the defense wrote in the motion, but clearly Mr. Chauvin was cautious about the amount of pressure he used to restrain Mr. Floyd, cautious enough to prevent bruising. The defense also argues the state had not offered evidence showing objective gross negligence from Chauvin. At the time of the Cup Foods incident, Mr. Chauvin was acting within his duties to execute a legitimate legal process, assisting other officers with effecting their arrest of George Floyd, the defense wrote. They argued the use of force in the incident was justified under Minnesota law and Minneapolis police policy. Officers' attempts to use verbalization, joint manipulation, and escort holds on Mr. Floyd had all failed. Mr. Floyd's active resistance required an escalation of force, they wrote. They go on to argue police department training materials show that officers are trained to place a knee on the person's neck and shoulder when executing certain restraint techniques. Mr. Chauvin acted according to MPD policy, his training, and within his duties as a licensed peace officer of the state of Minnesota, they wrote. The defense is also expected to claim drug use as well as health issues could have caused Floyd's death, arguing his body contained a lethal dose of fentanyl as well as methamphetamine at the time of his arrest. I think looking at just the arguments being made in this, I do not expect Derek Chauvin to be found guilty in this. If he was acting within the policy that is let out by the police department, you would expect the police department to be the individuals found guilty. You would expect whoever said that policy was the policy that should be done, even if the knee on the back is what killed him. The teaching of that policy and saying that that's the policy that should be done by police officers would be the direct issue of what killed George Floyd. It would not be the officer that's just following the policy that was in his particular training. Looking at an article from the Daily Wire, federal court places Trump's bump stock ban on hold. This is kind of noteworthy because we have the multiple gun legislations that are being called to be passed as a result of the Boulder massacre as well as some other incidents, and essentially what we're seeing is there is a push for saying that there is gun legislation out there that is unconstitutional. In the article, the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals placed a hold on federal ban on bump stocks on Thursday, ruling that the Trump-era regulation may be unconstitutional. A panel of judges on the Sixth Circuit decided 2-1 that former President Donald Trump's administration likely violated the Constitution when it banned bump stocks in February of 2018. Trump issued an executive order banning all devices that turn legal weapons into machine guns following a mass shooting in Las Vegas. In response to Trump's executive order, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, ATF, reinterpreted federal law that generally bans public ownership of machine guns. A machine gun under federal law is defined as any weapon that can automatically fire more than one shot per single pull of the trigger. The ATF reinterpreted the term single function of the trigger and automatically to make bump stocks illegal under existing federal law, according to Bloomberg Law. A bump stock is a device that can be used with a semi-automatic rifle to mimic an automatic weapon. Such a device was used in the Las Vegas shooting in which 58 people were murdered. I think it's noteworthy just because there's all talks about what new common sense gun legislation is going to be passed. I hate the term common sense because it seems the majority of the time most people don't have common sense, or common sense isn't very common. I think anytime you want to pass legislation, it needs to be very clear what the argument is for or against it, and just appealing to common sense is not a good argument. Finally, coming from Fox News, Chris Wallace rips Psaki for not allowing reporters at the southern border. Fox News' Chris Wallace ripped White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki over the administration's media policies after outlets including CNN criticized the Biden administration to denying the press access to the border. Just last week, we had a pool camera providing footage to Fox News just last week into the shelters We want to provide access into the Border Patrol facilities. We are mindful of the fact that we are in the middle of a pandemic. We want to keep these kids safe, Psaki told Fox News Sunday. We're absolutely committed to transparency and providing access to media. We're working to get that done as soon as we can. At this point, in allowing access to the Border Patrol facilities for reporters, you are being less transparent than the Trump administration, Wallace said. This, really hits at the issue going on that we see in the Biden administration. We see coming from most of the left-wing news organizations being very soft on Biden. If you remember, reported last week that Fox wasn't even called on during the news conference that Biden gave. And in a similar manner, we see that there are now coming attacks from the left and the right about the lack of transparency coming out of the current administration. And this is your March 29th Not So News update. Once again, please like and subscribe if you're looking for daily news content, and have a good one.